Stolen Legacy by George G.M. James. Greek philosophy is stolen Egyptian philosophy. Chapter 6. The Athenian Philosophers. 1. Socrates. His life, doctrines, summary of conclusions. 1. Life of Socrates. A. Date and place of birth. Socrates was born in Athens in the year 1469 BC. He was the son of Sophroniscus, a sculptor, and Phanerete, a midwife. Very little is known about his early years, but we are told that he was brought up in the profession of his father, and that he called himself not only a pupil of Prodicus and Aspasia, which statements suggest that he might have learnt from them music, geometry, and gymnastics, but also a self-taught philosopher, according to Xenophon in the Symposium. Up to the age of 40, his life appears to be a complete blank, the first mention being made of him when he served as an ordinary soldier in the sieges of Potidæa and Delium between 432 and 429 BC. B. His economic status and personality. Socrates did not accept fees for what he taught, and he became so poor that his wife, Xanthippe, became very dissatisfied with domestic conditions. He believed that he possessed a divine something, i.e., a divine voice which advised and guided him in the great crisis of his life. C. His condemnation and death in 399 BC. After the accustomed speeches of the accusers, Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon, Socrates followed with his defense, at the conclusion of which the judges voted 281 to 220, and Socrates was condemned to death. As a parting word, he addressed himself both to those who voted against him and those who voted in his favor. In the case of the former, he rebuked them by predicting that evil would befall them in consequence of their crime in condemning him. In the case of the latter, he not only consoled them with the assurance that no evil could come to a good man either in life or in death, but also expressed to them his idea about immortality. Quote, "Death is either an eternal and dreamless sleep, wherein there is no sensation at all, or it is a journey to another and a better world. Where are the famous men of old? Whichever alternative be true, death is not an evil, but a good. His death is willed by the gods, and he is content." Plato's Apology, chapters 25 to 28. His death was delayed through a state religious ceremonial, and he remained in prison for 30 days. We are told that during this time he was visited by his friends, who consisted of the inner circle, and also his wife, Xanthippe. That this was the occasion of his discourse concerning the immortality of the soul, that he could have escaped from death if he wished, because his friends visited him before daybreak and offered to set him free. But then he refused the offer. Accordingly, Socrates drank the hemlock and died. D. Crito's account. Crito, on the night before the death of Socrates, while he was in prison, on behalf of the company of visitors, made a final appeal to him to permit them to secure his escape, and spoke as follows. "O my Socrates, I beseech you for the last time to listen to me and save yourself. For to me, your death will be more than a single disaster. Not only shall I lose a friend, the like of whom I shall never find again, but many persons who do not know you and me well will think that I might have saved you if I had been willing to spend money, but that I neglected to do so. And what character could be more disgraceful than the character of caring more for money than for one's friends? The world will never believe that we were anxious to save you, but that you yourself refused to escape. Tell me this, Socrates. Surely you are not anxious about me and your other friends, and afraid, lest if you escape, the informers should say that we stole you away and get us into trouble, and involve us in a great deal of expense, or perhaps in the loss of all our property, and it may be, bring some other punishment upon us besides. If you have any fear of that kind, dismiss it. For, of course, we are bound to run those risks, and still greater risk than those if necessary in saving you. So do not, I beseech you, refuse to listen to me. Then Socrates replied, I am anxious about that, Crito, and about much besides. And Crito continued the appeal. Then have no fear on that score. There are men who, for no very large sum, are ready to bring you out of prison into safety. And then, these informers are cheaply bought, and there will be no need to spend much on them. My fortune is at your disposal, and I think that it's sufficient. And if you have any feeling about making use of my money, there are strangers in Athens whom you know, ready to use theirs, and one of them, Simmias of Thebes, who actually brought enough for the purpose, and Cebes, and many others are ready too. And therefore I repeat, do not shrink from saving yourself on that ground, and do not let what you said in court, that if you went into exile and you would not know what to do with yourself, stand in your way, for there are many places for you to go where you will be welcomed. If you choose to go to Thessaly, I have friends there who will make much of you and shelter you from any annoyance from the people of Thessaly. Consider then, Socrates, or rather, the time for consideration is past. We must resolve, and there is only one plan possible. Everything must be done tonight. If we delay any longer, we are lost. O Socrates, I implore you not to refuse to listen to me. Plato's Crito, chapters 3 to 5. E. Phaedo's account of the final scene just before the death of Socrates. In answer to another question from Echecrates, Phaedo replied, I will try to tell you the whole story. On the previous days, I and the others had always met in the morning at the court, where the trial was held, which was close to the prison, and then we would go into Socrates. We used to wait each morning until the prison was opened, conversing, for it was not opened early. When it was opened, we used to go into Socrates, and we generally spent the whole day with him. But on that morning we met earlier than usual, for the evening before we had learnt, on leaving the prison, that the ship had arrived from Delos. So we arranged to be at the usual place as early as possible. When we reached the prison, the porter, who generally let us in, came out to us and bade us wait a little, and not to go in until he himself summoned us. For the 11 were releasing Socrates from his fetters and giving him directions for his death. In no great while he returned and bade us enter. So we went in and found Socrates just released. When Xanthippe saw us, she wailed aloud and cried in her woman's way, This is the last time, Socrates, that you will talk with your friends, or they with you. And Socrates glanced at Crito and said, Crito, let her be taken home. So some of Crito's servants led her away, weeping bitterly and beating her breast. And it was about sunset, and the servant of the 11, after bidding Socrates farewell, gave him the instructions as to how to take the poison, and then handed it to him. Socrates took the cup and drank the poison cheerfully, and then walked about until his legs felt heavy. And when he had lain down, he made his last request to Crito in the following words: "I owe a cock to Asclepius. Do not forget to pay it." By this time the poison took effect, and he passed away. Plato, Phaedo, chapter 3, 65. 2. The doctrines of Socrates. The doctrine of nous, i.e., mind or intelligent cause, in order to account for God and creation. He is credited with the theological premise: whatever exists for a useful purpose is the work of an intelligence. 2. The doctrine of the supreme good. The supreme good, i.e., the summum bonum, is equated both with happiness and with knowledge. This, however, is not merely eutychia, which depends upon external conditions and accidents of fortune, but is eupraxia, a well-being which is conditioned by good action. This is an attainment in which man becomes godlike through self-denial of external needs and the cultivation of the mind. For happiness comes not through the perishable things of the external world, but through the things that endure, which are within us. 3. The doctrines of opposites in harmony. A. Odd and even are the elements of numbers. One is definite, but the other is unlimited, and the unit is the product both of odd and even. Hence, the universe consists of opposites, the finite and the infinite, the male and the female, the odd and the even, the left and right. B. Harmony is the union of opposites. 4. The doctrines concerning the soul. A. The immortality of the soul. B. The transmigration of the soul. C. The salvation of the soul. The purpose of philosophy is the salvation of the soul, whereby it feeds upon the truth congenial to its divine nature, and thus escapes from the wheel of rebirth and finally attains the consummation of unity with God. D. The body is the tomb of the soul. E. The aspirations of the soul. There is a realm of true reality which is above the world of sense. To this the soul aspires. 5. The doctrine of self-knowledge. Know thyself. Self-knowledge is the basis of true knowledge. The mysteries required as a first step the mastery of the passions, which made room for the occupation of unlimited powers. Hence, as a second step, the neophyte was required to search within himself for the new powers which had taken possession of him. The Egyptians consequently wrote on their temples, "Man, know thyself." 6. Astrology and geology. There was a suspicion that Socrates was also engaged in the study of astrology and geology, and that he taught these subjects, for in his defense before the Athenian judges, he stated that the more formidable of his accusers tried to persuade them with lies, that one Socrates, a wise man, was speculating about the heavens and about things beneath the earth, and that he was capable of making the worse appear the better reason. This suspicion is further supported by the indictment brought against Socrates, and which reads as follows: Miletus, the son of Miletus, of the deme Pithys, on his oath, brings the following accusation against Socrates, the son of Sophroniscus, of the deme Alopes. Socrates commits a crime by not believing in the gods of the city and by introducing new divinities. He also commits a crime by corrupting the youth. Penalty, death. There is still a third source from which the suspicion arose that Socrates was engaged also in astrology and geology. This was the caricature of Socrates published by Aristophanes in his comedy, The Clouds, as follows. Socrates is a miserable recluse who speaks a great deal of absurd and amusing nonsense about physics, and declares that Zeus is dethroned, that rotation reigns in his stead, and that the new divinities are air, which holds the earth suspended, ether, the clouds, and tongue. He professes to possess the power of Belial, which enables him to make the worse appear the better reason, and his teachings cause children to beat their parents. Aristophanes' Clouds, 828 and 380. Life and Trial of Socrates, After-Day Church, Introduction, page 18. 3. Summary of Conclusions. 1. Life and Personality of Socrates. There are two circumstances in the life of Socrates which demand our attention. A. He is said to have been completely unknown up to the age of 40, and B. to have lived a life of poverty. These circumstances point to secrecy in training, and poverty as conditions of his life, and as such they coincide with the requirements of the mystery system of Egypt and her secret schools, whether in the land of Egypt or abroad, which exacted the vows of secrecy and poverty from all neophytes and initiates. All aspirants of the mysteries had to receive secret training and preparation, and Socrates was no exception. He alone of the three Athenian philosophers deserves the appellation of a true master mason. Plato was a great coward, and Aristotle was greater still. At the execution of Socrates, Plato fled to Megara to the lodge of Euclid, and Aristotle, when indicted, fled in exile to Chalcis. 2. The Doctrines. The doctrine of the nous, or an intelligent cause, which with reference to this doctrine, we find that it is also credited to Anaxagoras, who is said to have lived between 500 and 430 BC, and who therefore antedated Socrates 469 to 399 BC, and expounding it. Secondly, further examination shows that the doctrine of the nous is also a direct inference from the doctrine of cognition, as credited to Democritus, 460 BC to 360 BC, who is credited with stating that fire atoms are distributed through the universe, and that mind is composed of fire atoms. Therefore, it can be inferred, A. that mind fills or is distributed through the universe, and B. since only like can produce like, then the mind of the universe must have been produced by a mind which is its source. Thirdly, this doctrine of the nous is a doctrine that originated from the ancient mysteries of Egypt, where the god Osiris was represented in all Egyptian temples by the symbol of an open eye. This symbol indicated not only sight that transcends time and space, but also the omniscience of God, as the great mind which created and which directs the universe. This symbol is carried as a decoration in all modern Masonic lodges and has the same meaning. 2. The doctrine of the supreme good. This doctrine of the supreme good, or summum bonum, is likewise a very ancient doctrine, which takes us back to the Egyptian mysteries. As stated in the books on Greek philosophy and by Socrates, it is only in part, and consequently a mistaken notion of the original doctrine has resulted. To say that the supreme good is happiness, that happiness is well-being, that well-being is knowledge, and that knowledge is virtue, is the same thing as saying that the supreme God is virtue. Supreme good is virtue. In the Egyptian mysteries, however, the concept of the supreme good is expressed as the purpose of virtue, and that is the salvation of the soul, by liberating it from the 10 bodily fetters. This process of liberation is a process of purification both of mind and of body, the former by the study of philosophy and science, and the latter by bodily ascetic disciplines. This training was continued from the baptism of water, and was subsequently followed by the baptism of fire, when the candidate had made the necessary progress. This process transformed man and made him godlike and fitted him for union with God. The concept of the supreme good, which originally came from the Egyptian mysteries, is the earliest theory of salvation, and Socrates must have derived this doctrine from that source, or indirectly from the Pythagoreans. The following doctrines are generally admitted as having been derived from the Pythagoreans: A. Transmigration of the soul. B. The immortality of the soul. C. The tomb of the soul is the body. D. The doctrines of opposites and harmony. Since doctrines A, B, C, and D originated from the Pythagoreans, and since the Pythagoreans derived them from the Egyptians, then their Egyptian origin, directly or indirectly, becomes evident. 4. Astrology and geology. From A, the indictment, B, his defense before the Athenian judges, and C, the caricature by Aristophanes in the Clouds, we discover that Socrates was suspected of being a student of nature and of introducing new divinities into Athens. Again, it must be stated that under the mystery system of Egypt, the study of nature was a requirement, and since the Athenians prosecuted and condemned Socrates to death for engaging in this study and spreading the knowledge, they must have regarded the new ideas as foreign or of Egyptian origin. 5. The doctrine of self-knowledge. The doctrine of self-knowledge, for centuries attributed to Socrates, is now definitely known to have originated from the Egyptian temples, on the outside of which the words, "Man, know thyself," were written. It is evident that Socrates taught nothing new, because his doctrines are eclectic, containing elements from Anaxagoras, Democritus, Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Pythagoras, and finally have been traced to the teachings of the Egyptian mystery system. 6. The importance of the farewell conversations of Socrates with his pupils and friends at the prison. In examining what took place during the farewell conversations of Socrates with his pupils and friends, at least 5 points should be noted. A. The subject of the conversations. B. The determination of his friends to smuggle him away. C. His refusal to accept liberation. D. His dying request, which was addressed to Crito, whom he asked to pay an important debt for him. E. The value of those conversations in their present form in literature. Now the question arises, what is the meaning and significance of these 5 points? The answers and conclusions are as follows. A. As the subject of the conversations dealt with the immortality and salvation of the soul, we at once recognized the fact that this was the central theme of the ancient mysteries, and consequently that Socrates was acquainted with the doctrines. Moreover, when we read the Phaedo and the doctrines, both of opposites and recollection, which he had advanced in proof of immortality, we are convinced that he must have received his training from the mystery system of Egypt, in connection with which there are hierophants and qualified teachers. B. Secondly, in dealing with the behavior of his friends and their determination to smuggle him away, we are dealing with their attempt to render help to a brother in distress. This was the life that initiates were expected to live, for brotherhood was another great principle upon which the Egyptian mysteries laid emphasis. Evidently, Socrates was a brother initiate, of the Egyptian mysteries, since it comprised one universal brotherhood. C. Thirdly, in dealing with the refusal of Socrates to accept liberation, again we are dealing with a type of behavior which singles him out as an advanced initiate of the ancient mysteries of Egypt. In the paths to mastery and victory, the mystery system regarded unselfishness or sacrifice as an advanced stage of attainment, which must be accomplished before unlimited power could be bestowed upon the candidate. It is true that Anaxagoras escaped for his life, and in like manner Plato and Aristotle, but this only serves to show that Socrates had reached a higher degree in the mysteries than all of them. This necessitated training, and the training center was Egypt. D. Fourthly, with reference to the dying request of Socrates addressed to Crito, in which he asked him to pay a certain debt, we again encounter another of the great ideals essential to the life of an initiate. This, in the teaching of the mysteries, embraces the exercise of a cardinal virtue, i.e. justice, a practice which the candidate must adopt in order that his sense of value might also develop. Here again, the action of Socrates reveals that he was a brother initiate with a high sense of justice and honesty, since he did not wish to die without discharging all his obligations. Certainly, the dying request of Socrates reveals him as a loyal member of the mystery system of Egypt. E. Fifthly and finally, what value may we attach to the literature which deals with the farewell conversations of Socrates with his friends and pupils? Since this literature embraces a man whose beliefs and practices coincide with those of the initiates of the ancient mysteries of Egypt, then we may regard the study of Xenophon's Memorabilia, Plato's Apology, the Phaedo, Erythro, Crito, and Timaeus as valuable specimens of literature of the mysteries or Masonic world. 2. Plato. Early life, travels, disputed writings, his doctrines, summary of conclusions. 1. His early life. Plato is said to have been born at Athens in 427 BC, and that his father's name was Aristo, and his mother's name was Perictone, who was also a relative of Solon. Little information is known about his early life and training, but there is a supposition that because his parents were wealthy, he must have had such educational opportunities as were available to a wealthy youth. He is said to have studied the doctrines of Heraclitus under Credence, and to have been a pupil of Socrates for 8 years. It is also said that he was a soldier. 2. His travels. He was 28 years old when Socrates died, i.e. 399 BC, and together with the other pupils of Socrates, he fled from Athens to Euclid at Megara for safety. He kept away from Athens for 12 years, during which time it is also said that apart from visiting Euclid, he traveled A. to southern Italy, where he met the remnant of Pythagoreans, B. to Syracuse in Sicily, where through Dion he met Dionysius, to whom he became a tutor, who subsequently caused him to be sold as a slave, and C. to Egypt. B. His academy. Plato is said to have returned to Athens in 387 BC, when a middle-aged man of 40 years, and to have opened an academy in a gymnasium on the western suburbs of Athens, over which he presided for 20 years. He is said to have taught the following subjects: A. Political science, B. Statesmanship, C. Mathematics, D. Dialectics, and it is said that the curriculum was based upon the educational principles advocated in the Republic. 3. His writings are disputed and doubted by modern scholarship. There are 36 dialogues and a number of letters which Plato is supposed to have written, but which are disputed and doubted by modern scholarship. A. Grote states that Plato has written only those dialogues that bear his name. B. Scharschmidt states that only 9 of the 36 dialogues are genuine, while C. Aristotle considered the Platonic dialogues as 9 in number, namely the Laws, Timaeus, Phaedo, Symposium, Phaedrus, Gorgias, Theaetetus, Philebus, and the Republic, which he thought are genuine. D. Of the remaining 27 dialogues, some scholars contend that the youthful dialogues should be included with the genuine ones, and these are the Apology, Crito, Enthydemus, Laches, Lysis, and Protagoras. And E. Of the remaining 21 dialogues, scholars suggest that those which were not written by Plato must have been written by his pupils. 4. The doctrines of Plato. The doctrines attributed to Plato are scattered over a wide area of literature, being found in piecemeal throughout what are called dialogues, but particularly in connection with 1. The theory of ideas and its application to natural phenomena, which includes the doctrines of A. The real and unreal, B. The nous, mind, and C. Creation. 2. The ethical doctrines concerning A. The highest good, B. Definition of virtue, and C. The cardinal values. 3. The doctrine of the ideal state, whose attributes are compared with the attributes of the soul and justice. Following this order, they are as follows. 1. The theory of ideas. A. Definition of ideas. This may be expressed in the following syllogism. The idea, retaining its unity, unchangeableness, and perfection, is the element of reality in a thing. The idea is the concept by which a thing is known. Therefore, the concept by which a thing is known is the element of reality in a thing. It follows also that since the concept or idea of a thing is real, then the concrete thing itself is unreal. B. The application of the theory of ideas to natural phenomena. In view of the definition of the idea, 3 doctrines have resulted. A. The doctrine of the real and unreal. The things which we see around us are the phenomena of nature. They belong to the earthly realm. They are only copies of their prototypes, the ideas and noumena, which dwell in the heavenly realm. The ideas are real and perfect, but the phenomena are unreal and imperfect. And it is the function of philosophy to enable the mind to rise above the contemplation of the visible copies of ideas and advance to a knowledge of the ideas themselves. There is, however, something common between them, because the phenomena partake of the idea. This participation is an imitation, but it is so imperfect that the natural phenomena fall far short of ideas. B. The doctrine of the nous, or world soul. This teaches that the universe are living animals, and that they are endowed with the most perfect and intelligent souls. That if God had made the world as perfect as the nature of matter allowed, that he must have endowed it with a perfect soul. This soul acts as mediator between the ideas and natural phenomena, and is the cause of life, motion, order, and knowledge in the universe. C. the doctrine of a demiurgus in creation, cosmology. In the myth of creation found in the Timaeus, we find the doctrine on creation, as it is ascribed to Plato's authorship, as follows. Out of chaos, which was ruled by necessity, God, the demiurgus or creator, made order by fashioning the phenomena of matter according to the eternal prototypes, i.e., the ideas, in as perfect a manner as the imperfection of matter would allow. He next created the gods and ordered them to fashion the body of man, while he himself made the soul of man from the same material as that of the world soul. The soul of man is a self-moving principle and is responsible for life, motion, and consciousness in the body. 2. The ethical doctrines. The ethical doctrines that have been attributed to Plato are A. That of the highest good, i.e. the summum bonum, B. the connotation of virtue, and C. the reduction of the virtues to 4, and the place of wisdom among them. A. As something subjective, and as an earthly experience, the highest good is happiness, but as an objective attainment, it is the idea of good, and consequently identified with God. Therefore, the purpose of a man's life is freedom from the fetters of the body, in which the soul is confined, and the practice of virtue and wisdom makes him like a god, even while on earth. Virtue is the order, the health, and the harmony of the soul. There are many virtues, but the greatest is wisdom. All virtues may be reduced to the 4 cardinal virtues: wisdom, fortitude, temperance, and justice. 3. The ideal state, the republic. The doctrine attributed to Plato in the field of civics is the doctrine of the ideal state, whose attributes are compared with the attributes of the soul and justice. In a state, virtue should be the chief aim, and unless philosophers become rulers, or rulers become through students of philosophy, there will be unceasing troubles for states and humanity at large. The ideal state is modeled upon the individual soul, and just as the soul has 3 parts, so also should the state have 3 parts: the rulers, the warriors, and the workers. Similarly, just as the harmony of the soul depends upon the proper subordination of its parts, so also does the state depend upon the proper subordination of its parts in order to enjoy peace. Here, Plato introduces the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds, in order to show that virtue is to the soul as justice is to the state. One horse is of noble origin, while the other is ignoble. Consequently, they cannot agree. As the noble horse strives to mount up to the heavenly regions which are suitable to its nature, so the other tries to drag him down. Likewise, in dealing with the soul, it is the proper subordination of its parts that enable the noble in man to attain its excellence. So also in dealing with the state, it is justice, or the proper subordination of the different classes, that makes it an ideal state. 5. Summary of conclusions. The doctrines of Plato are eclectic and point to Egyptian origin. 1. The doctrine of the real and unreal, to represent doctrine found in the comparison between natural phenomena and the ideas, is only an instance of the application of the doctrine of opposites. Here the things of this world have their corresponding types in the heavenly realm. Here the ideas correspond to being. while the natural phenomena correspond to night being. But the doctrine of opposites may be traced back not only to Socrates, Democritus, Parmenides, and the Pythagoreans, but further back to its original source, i.e., the Egyptian mystery system, where the principle of opposites was represented not only by pairs of male and female gods such as Osiris and Isis, but also by pairs of pillars in the front of all the Egyptian temples. 2. The doctrine of the nous, or world soul, is a principle of Egyptian magic. Plato is credited with expressing this doctrine in the form of a simile, in which he compares the world to a living animal, which is composed of souls, one being made perfect and responsible for the life, motion, and knowledge of the animal or universe. This doctrine may be traced not only to A. Democritus, who based his teaching about the fire atoms of the soul and cognition upon the magical principle of the Egyptians, that the qualities of an animal are distributed throughout its parts, but also to B. Anaxagoras, who is said to have advanced the nous, mind, as responsible for creating order out of chaos, and which is omnipotent and omniscient. The doctrine of the nous, as a matter of fact, originated from C, the mystery system of Egypt, in connection with which the god Osiris was represented in all Egyptian temples by the symbol of an open eye, referred to elsewhere. This symbol indicated not only sight that transcended space and time, but also omniscience, as the great mind which created and which still directs the universe. This symbol also forms a part of the decoration of all Masonic lodges of the modern world and dates back to the Osirian or sun worship of the Egyptians, more than 5000 BC. This same notion was also represented by the Egyptians by a god with eyes all over him and was known as the all-seeing eye. 3. The doctrine of the demiurge in creation. This doctrine, which ascribed to the authorship of Plato, did not by any means originate from Plato. It was not only a current doctrine at the time of Plato, but was well known among the Eastern ancient nations and taught by them many centuries before his time, 427 to 347 BC. History tells us that the Persians taught this doctrine more than 6 centuries BC through their leader Zoroaster. History also tells us that Pythagoras, 500 BC, taught the same doctrine expressed in terms of monads. The universe consisted of 2 unities: A, the unity from which the series of numbers or beings is derived, being absolute unity, which is the source of all, i.e., the monad of monads, or the god of gods, and B, the one, i.e., the first in the series of derived numbers or beings. It is opposed to and limited by plurality, and therefore it is a relative unity, i.e., a created monad or god, a demiurge. Consequently, the opposition between the one and the many is the source of all the rest. Furthermore, history likewise tells us that the original source of the doctrine of a demiurge in creation was Egypt, and it dates back to the creation story of Egypt, 4000 BC, which is to be found in the account given by the Memphite theology, an inscription on stone now kept in the British Museum. It contains the theological and cosmological views of the Egyptians, which date back to the very beginning of Egyptian history, when the first dynasties had made their new capital at Memphis, the city of the god Ptah, i.e. about 4000 BC or even earlier. The Egyptian cosmology must be presented in three parts, each part being supplementary to the other, and presenting a complete philosophy by their combination. Part 1 deals with the gods of chaos. Part 2 deals with the gods of order and arrangement in creation. And Part 3 deals with the primate of the gods, through whose logos creation was accomplished. In Part 1, pre-creation or chaos is represented by Ptah, the primate of the gods, emerging from the primeval waters, Nun in the form of a hill, Ta Tjin, i.e. the risen land. 2. Atum, i.e. Atom, the sun god, immediately joining Ta by emerging also from the chaotic waters, Nun, and sitting upon him, the hill. 3. A description of the other qualities within the chaos follows. There are 4 pairs of male and female gods in the form of frogs and serpents. Their names are A. Nun and Nonet, the primeval ocean and primeval matter. B. Ha and Hohet, the illimitable and boundless. C. Cook and Coquet, darkness and obscurity. And D. Ammon and Amunet, the hidden and concealed ones. Memphite Theology in Ancient Egyptian Religion by Frankfurt, page 10, page 21. In Part 2, the gods of order and arrangement are represented as follows. The same first pair of pre-creation gods are together present, i.e. Ptah, the primeval hill, who is the thought and the word of all the gods, together with Atum, who rests upon the Ptah. Atum, i.e. Atom, having absorbed the thought and creative power of Ptah, then proceeds with the work of creation. He names 4 pairs of parts of his own body, which become gods, and in this way 8 gods are created, who together with himself become 9 gods in one family, or Godhead, called the Ennead. Magic is the key to the interpretation of ancient religions and philosophy. Part 3 tells us of the specific powers of Ptah, which Atum absorbs, but does not tell us how he absorbs them. Part 1 tells us how, for it describes the movement of Atum as emerging from the primeval waters and sitting upon Ptah, the risen land or hill. It, however, does not give us the reason for Atum's movement, a behavior which can be understood only when we apply to its interpretation the key of magical principles. The magical principle. Now, what is the magical principle involved in Atum's behavior? It is this. The qualities or attributes of entities, human or divine, are distributed throughout their various parts, and contact with such entities releases those qualities. It is now clear that by making contact with Ptah, Atum immediately received the attributes of Ptah's created thought and speech and omnipotence, and became the instrument and the logos and the demiurge, through whom the task of creation was undertaken and completed. It is also clear that according to the Memphite theology, the doctrines of a demiurge and created gods originated from the Egyptian religion and mystery system, and not from Plato, who lived from 427 to 347 BC. The Memphite theology will be dealt with in a separate chapter to show the origin of Greek philosophy. 4. The doctrines of A, the highest good, B, virtue, and C, the cardinal virtues. This is really the earliest theory of salvation, and it originated from the Egyptian mysteries, but not from Plato. The main purpose of the Egyptian mysteries was the salvation of the human soul. The Egyptians believed the human body to be a prison house, where the soul is chained by 10 fetters. This condition not only kept man separated from God, but made him subject to the wheel of rebirth or reincarnation. In order to escape from the effects of his condition, 2 requirements had to be fulfilled by the neophyte. He must keep the 10 commandments taught by the mysteries, for by such a discipline he would gain conquest over the fetters of the soul and liberate it so as to make its development possible. And he, now being well qualified and duly prepared, must undergo a series of initiations in order to develop his soul from the human stage to that of a god. Such a transformation was known as salvation. It placed the neophyte in harmony with nature, man, and God. It deified him, i.e., made him become godlike, and this attainment was known as the highest good. According to this theory of salvation, man is expected to work out his own salvation without a mediator between himself and his God. Plato defines virtue as the order or discipline of the soul. This meaning we accept, since it agrees with the purpose of the 10 commandments of the mysteries. The doctrines of the 10 virtues and the 10 fetters are as old as the Egyptian history itself. Each commandment or discipline represented a principle of virtue, and the function of each virtue was to remove a fetter. Hence, a life of virtue was antecedent and preparatory to those further experiences, i.e., the initiations which led to gradual perfection and the divinity of the neophyte. Plato is also credited with having reduced all virtues to 4 cardinal values, and which assigning the highest place among them to wisdom as follows: wisdom, fortitude, temperance, and justice. We are also informed through the history of philosophy that Socrates, the alleged teacher of Plato, taught that wisdom was the equivalent of all virtue. This divergence of opinion between pupil and teacher is significant, since it points to the fact that both of them simply speculated about a system of ethics which was current in the ancient world and which neither of them had produced. This system of ethics has already been mentioned, belonged to the mystery system of Egypt, which required neophytes in preparation for initiation to keep the following 10 commandments, underlying which were 10 principles of virtue. The neophyte must 1. Control his thoughts. 2. Control his actions. 3. Have devotion of purpose. 4. Have faith in the ability of his master to teach him the truth. 5. Have faith in himself to assimilate the truth. 6. Have faith in himself to wield the truth. 7. Be free from resentment under the experience of persecution. 8. Be free from resentment under experience of wrong. 9. Cultivate the ability to distinguish between right and wrong. And 10. Cultivate the ability to distinguish between the real and the unreal. He must have a sense of values. If we now compare the order in the above outline with the order in which the cardinal values are said to be arranged, we shall immediately see that the first place which wisdom occupies among the virtues was given to it by the Egyptian mysteries and not by Plato. Consequently, in 1 and 2, from the control of thoughts and actions, we derive the virtue of wisdom. In 4, from freedom of resentment under persecution, we derive the virtue of fortitude. And from an ability to distinguish between right and wrong, and between the real and unreal, we derive the virtues of justice and temperance. The doctrine of the ideal state. Concerning the authorship and source of this doctrine, there are two conclusions. First, Plato was not the author of the Republic, and second, the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds is not a product of Plato, but is derived from the Egyptian Book of the Dead in the Judgment Drama. Concerning the first conclusion, it is only necessary to reaffirm what has already been stated in connection with the writings of Plato, and this is that they are disputed not only by such modern scholars as Grote and Schwarzschild, but also by ancient historians. Diogenes Laertius, Aristoxenus, and Favorinus, 80 to 150 AD, who declare that the subject matter of the Republic was found in the controversies written by Protagoras, 481 to 411 BC, at the time of whose death Plato was but a boy. Furthermore, the authorship of Plato rests only upon the opinions of Aristotle and Theophrastus, both of whose aims were the compilation of a Greek philosophy with Egyptian material. Concerning the second conclusion, it must be pointed out that the allegory of the charioteer and the winged steeds is a description of the quality and destiny of the soul as it appears at the bar of justice. In the judgment drama of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, in this drama, the great Chief Justice and President of the unseen world, Pimentes, i.e. Osiris, is seated on a throne, and is attended by the goddesses Isis and Nephthys, while 42 assistant judges are seated around. Near Osiris there are 4 genii of Amenti, the unseen world, represented as short vases called canopi, in which the different viscera, symbolizing the moral qualities of the individual, are kept embalmed. The intestines have a very important connection with the moral qualities of the individual, since they are blamed for any sin which the individual commits. At the opposite end, the deceased is introduced by Horus, while in the center stands the scale of justice, which has been erected by Anubis. On one side of it there appears a heart-shaped vase containing the moral qualities of the deceased, while on the other side there is a figure of the goddess of truth. Thoth, the scribe, holding a roll of papyrus, stands by and makes a record of the weighing. After this is completed, Horus receives the record from Thoth and advances to Osiris to make known the results. Osiris listens, and at the end of the report pronounces sentence of reward or punishment. In the meantime, fearful monsters lurk around the scene to destroy the soul if the verdict is against it. Let us observe that 1. The motion of the scale in the judgment drama corresponds with the up and down motion of the winged steeds of the allegory. 2. The opposite qualities weighed on the scale correspond with the opposite qualities possessed by the noble and ignoble steeds of the allegory. 3. The idea of justice symbolized by the scale of judgment drama corresponds with the idea of justice expressed in the allegory. The winged steeds corresponds with the monsters of the judgment drama. B. The authorship of the Republic. According to Diogenes Laertius, Book 3, and pages 311 and 327, it is stated both by Aristoxenus and Favorinus that nearly the whole of the subject matter of Plato's Republic was found in the controversies written by Protagoras. Furthermore, according to Rogers' Student's History of Philosophy, page 78, it is stated that although Plato might have drawn heavily upon the reminiscences of Socrates, whose lectures he attended, Yet the subject matter of the Republic is a more carefully reasoned system of philosophy than can be easily attributed to Socrates. That the whole volume is a cumulative argument into which there are subtly interwoven opinions on almost every subject of philosophical importance. It is obvious that modern scholarship doubts that Plato drew the subject matter of the Republic from Socrates, and is inclined to attribute authorship to Plato himself. If, however, we take into consideration the fact that the subject matter of the Republic was in circulation long before the time of Plato, for Protagoras is supposed to have lived from 481 to 411 BC, and Plato from 427 to 347 BC, reason forbids the assignment of the authorship to Plato. But the important question remains, from what source did Protagoras draw the ideas of the Republic which were circulated in the controversies? Textbooks on Greek philosophy tell us that Protagoras was a pupil of Democritus, but when we turn to the writings of Democritus, we are unable to discover any connection between them and the A. educational system and the B. paternal government, which are advocated in the Republic. This fact forces us to the conclusion that the subject matter of Plato's Republic was neither produced by Plato nor any Greek philosopher. C. The authorship of Timaeus. According also to Diogenes Laertius, Book 8, pages 399 to 401, when Plato visited Dionysius at Sicily, he paid Philolaus, a Pythagorean, 40 Alexandrian minae of silver for a book from which he copied the whole contents of the Timaeus. Under these circumstances, it is clear that Plato wrote neither the Republic nor the Timaeus, whose subject matter identifies them with the purpose of the mysteries of Egypt. Six. The chariot was not a culture pattern of the Greeks at the time of Plato, nor was it used by them in warfare. Greek culture and traditions did not furnish Plato with the idea of the chariot and winged steeds, for nowhere in their brief military history, i.e. up to the time of Plato, do we find the use of such a war machine by the Greeks. The only nearby nation who specialized in the manufacture of chariots and the breeding of horses was the Egyptians. When Joseph was governor in Egypt, the horse and war chariot were in use, and when the Israelites fled from the country, Pharaoh pursued them to the Red Sea in chariots. Even Homer and Diodorus, who visited Egypt, testified that they saw a great multitude of war chariots and numerous stables along the banks of the Nile, from Memphis to Thebes. And since the judgment drama in the Egyptian Book of the Dead reveals the entire philosophy contained in the allegory, Plato cannot be credited as its author. The following sketch of the military history of the Greeks shows that the chariot was not used by them, nor was it their culture pattern. External wars, or wars with the Persians. A. The Ionian revolt against Persian rule, 499 to 494 BC. This climaxed in a naval engagement at Lade, where the Ionian fleet was defeated. B. The Battle of Marathon, 490 BC. During the summer of 490 BC, the Greeks met the Persians at the Bay of Marathon, and after a brief fight with bows and arrows, both belligerents withdrew to prepare for more decisive engagements. C. The Battle of Thermopylae, 480 BC. 10 years after Marathon, the Persians and Greeks met again to settle their grievances. The Persians anchored in the Gulf of Pegasus, while the Greeks anchored off Cape Artemisium. A battle followed, and Thermopylae was captured by the Persians. D. The Battle of Salamis, 479 BC. Both Persians and Greeks met again at Salamis in 479 BC, and a naval engagement followed. With considerable loss of ships on both sides, both belligerents withdrew without any decision. E. The Confederacy of Delos and their wars with the Persians, 478 to 448 BC. The purpose of the Confederacy was defense against Persian aggression, and two naval battles were fought, one at the river Eurymedon in 467 BC, when the Greeks gained a minor victory, and the other at Cyprus in 449 BC, when the island was captured by the Persians. Chariots were not used in any of these engagements. B. Internal wars, i.e. the Peloponnesian Wars, 460 to 445 BC and 431 to 421 BC, respectively. These wars were fought between the different Greek states, and their major engagements were maritime. In 432 BC, Athens blocked Potidaea, and Megara was excluded from Greek markets. In 431 BC, Thebes attacked Plataea, and while a Peloponnesian army occupied Attica, an Athenian fleet raided Peloponnesus. Pericles conducted the evacuation of Attica. The oligarchs at Corcyra were massacred, and after the seizure of Amphipolis, Nicias sued for peace, 422 BC. It is evident that Greek culture and tradition did not furnish Plato with the idea of the charioteer and winged steeds, for nowhere in their brief military history, i.e. up to the time of Plato, do we find the use of such a war machine by the Greeks as a chariot. The only nearby nation who specialized in the manufacture of chariots and horse breeding was the Egyptians, as already mentioned. And since the judgment drama in the Egyptian Book of the Dead depicts the allegory of the charioteer and winged steeds, credit for its authorship cannot be given to Plato, but to the Egyptians. 3. Aristotle. A. Early life and training, and B. His own list of books. C. Other list of books. 2. Doctrines. 3. Summary of conclusions. His doctrines. The Library of Alexandria. True source of his unusual number of books. The discrepancies and doubts in his life. A. Birth and early life and training. According to the textbooks on the history of Greek philosophy, Aristotle was born in 384 BC at Stagira, a town in Thrace. His father, Neomachus, is said to have been a physician to Amyntas, king of Macedonia. Nothing is mentioned in books about his early education, only that he became an orphan, and at the age of 19 he went to Athens, where he spent 20 years as a pupil of Plato. We are also informed that after the death of Plato, his nephew became the master of his school, and that Aristotle left immediately for Mysia, where he met and married the niece of Hermaeus. Likewise, that after the death of Amyntas of Macedon, his son Philip, having become king, appointed Aristotle as tutor of his son Alexander, a boy of 13 years, later to be called the Great, in consequence of his conquest of Egypt. After Philip's assassination in 336 BC, Alexander became king, and we are informed that he immediately planned an Asiatic campaign and included Egypt, during which time Aristotle is said to have returned to Athens and founded a school in a gymnasium called the Lyceum. We are further informed that Aristotle conducted this school for only 12 years, that Alexander the Great advanced him the funds to purchase a large number of books, that its pupils were called peripatetics, and that owing to an incident for impiety brought against him by a priest named Eurymedon, he fled from Athens to Chalcis in Euboea, where he remained in exile until his death in 322 BC. B. His own list of books. Aristotle is credited with classifying his own writings as follows. 1. The Theoretic, whose object is truth, and which included A. Mathematics, B. Physics, and C. Theology. 2. The Practical, whose object is the useful, and which included A. Ethics, B. Economics, and C. Politics. 3. The Productive or Poetic, whose object is the beautiful, and which included A. Poetry, B. Art, and C. Rhetoric. Neither logic nor metaphysics was in this list. C. Other list of books. There are two lists of books which have come down to modern times from Alexandrine and Arabian sources. The older list, derived from the Alexandrine Hermippus, 200 BC, who estimated the books of Aristotle at 400, which, according to Zeller's suggestion, must have been in the Alexandrine library at the time of the compilation of the list, since works which are now considered to be Aristotle's are not found in the list. The latter, derived from Arabian sources, was compiled by Ptolemy, or the first or 2nd century A.D. This list mentions most of the works in the modern collection and has a total of 1,000 books. Doctrines of Aristotle. 1. Metaphysics, or the principles of being in the metaphysical realm. 1. Aristotle defines metaphysics as the science of being as being. 2. He names the attributes of being as A. Actuality, i.e. perfection, and B. Potentiality, the capacity for perfection. 3. He states that all created beings are composed of actuality and potentiality. These two principles are present and are mixed in all created beings except one, whose being is actuality, and includes the composition of A. Matter and form, B. Substance and accident, C. Soul and its faculties, D. Active and passive intellect. 2. Principles of being in the physical realm. There are 4 principles of being in the physical realm, which are called causes. 1. Matter. The material cause is the potentiality or capacity of existence. It is that out of which being is made. 2. Form or essence. The formal cause is that which gives actuality to existence. It is that into which a thing is made. When matter is united with form, the result is organized or realized being that has come to existence in the process of nature. 3. Final cause is that for which everything exists. Everything has a purpose, and that purpose is the final cause. A final cause always implies intelligence, but this is not always true in the case of the efficient cause. Consequently, in the realm of nature, every being or living organism is the complex effect of 4 causes. 1. The substance out of which it is made, i.e. material cause. 2. The type of idea according to which the embryo tends to develop, i.e. formal cause. The act of creation or generation, i.e. the efficient cause. 4. The purpose or end for which the organism is created, i.e. final cause. In other words, matter, type, creation, and purpose are the 4 principles which underlie all existing things. 3. Doctrines concerning the existence of God. 1. Although motion is eternal, there cannot be an indefinite series of movers and the moved. Therefore there must be one, the first in the series which is unmoved, i.e. the unmoved mover. 2. The actual is antecedent to the potential, for although last in appearance, is really first in nature. Therefore, before all matter in the composition of actual and potential, pure actuality must have existed. Therefore, actuality is the cause of all things that exist, and since it is pure actuality, its life is essentially free from all material conditions. It is the thought of thought, the absolute spirit who dwells in eternal peace and self-enjoyment, who knows himself and the absolute truth, and is in need of neither action nor virtue. 3. God is one, for matter is the principle of plurality, and the first intelligence is free from material conditions. His life is contemplative thought. Neither providence nor will is comparable with the eternal repose in which he dwells. God is not connected with the world. 4. The doctrine of the origin of the world. The world is eternal because matter, motion, and time are eternal. 5. The doctrine concerning nature. Nature is everything which has the principle of motion and rest. It is spontaneous and self-determining from within. Nature does nothing in vain, but according to definite law it is always striving for the best, according to a plan of development, which is obstructed only by matter. The striving of nature is through the less perfect to the more perfect. 6. The doctrine concerning the universe. The world is globe-shaped, circular, and most perfect in form. The heaven, which is composed of ether, stands in immediate contact with the first cause. The stars, which are eternal, come next in order. The earth ball is in the middle, and is the furthest from the prime mover and least participant of divinity. 7. The doctrine of the soul. The soul is not merely a harmony of the body or the blending of opposites. It is neither the four elements nor their compound, for it transcends all material considerations. The soul and body are not two distinct things, but one and two different aspects, i.e., just as form is related to matter. The soul is the power which a living body possesses, and it is the end for which the body exists, i.e., the final cause of its existence. While the soul, which is the radical principle of life, is one, yet it has several faculties. Those faculties are 1. Sensitive, 2. Rational, 3. Nutritive, 4. Appetitive, 5. Locomotive. Of these, the sensitive and the rational are the most important, sensation being the faculty by means of which the forms of sensible things are received, just as impression is made as by a seal, and intelligent knowledge being the faculty by means of which intellectual knowledge is acquired. It is the seat of ideas only. It does not create them, since knowledge comes through the senses. Summary of conclusions. A. His doctrines. 1. The doctrine of being. By declaring the attributes of being as A. Actuality, or the determining principle, and B. Potentiality, or the indeterminate principle, Aristotle attempted to explain reality in terms of the principle of opposites. But this principle was used not only by the Pythagoreans, Parmenides, and Democritus in a similar manner, but also by Socrates in his attempt to prove the immortality of the soul, and by Plato, who saw reality as the concept of things as distinguished from the things themselves, as the noumena as distinct from the phenomena, and as the real distinct from the unreal. But the principle of opposites originated from the Egyptian mystery system, whose gods were male and female, and whose temples carried in front of them two pillars as symbols of the principle of opposites. It is obvious that Aristotle was not the author of this doctrine, but the Egyptians. 2. The existence of God. A. The theological concept has not only been embraced by Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, but also by the peoples of the remotest antiquity. In the accounts found in the first chapter of Genesis and in the Memphite theology found in chapters 20 and 23 of Frankfurt's ancient Egyptian religion, creation proceeds from chaos to order by definite and gradual steps, showing design and purpose in nature, and suggesting that it must be the work of a divine intelligence. The dates of these sources carry us far back into antiquity, many centuries before the time of Aristotle, between 2000 and 5000 BC. We are also told that in addition to the theological concept, Aristotle introduced the concept of the, quote, unmoved mover, end quote, in order to prove the existence of God. But the, quote, unmoved mover is none other than the atum of the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, the demiurge, through whose command, logos, 4 pairs of gods were created out of different parts of his body and who accordingly moved out of him. This act of creation took place while Atum remained unmoved, as he embraced Ptah. Thus, the family of 9 gods was created, and has been named the Ennead. It is quite clear that the concept of the unmoved mover is derived from the Egyptian theological or mystery system, and not from Aristotle, as the modern world has made us believe. Incidentally, but no less important, it might be mentioned here that in this story of the created gods by Atum, the sun god, into a family of 9, i.e. the Ennead, we have the original source of 2 important scientific hypotheses of modern times. 1. There are 9 major planets, and 2. The sun is the parent of the other planets. This latter being supported by the nebular hypothesis. Let us remember also that A. The worship of the planets began in Egypt, and B. The Egyptian temples were the first observatories of history. C. In attempting to prove the existence of God, or a first cause, by reference to actuality or potentiality, Aristotle simply followed the traditional custom of the ancients, who used the principle of opposites in order to explain the functions of nature. D. Plato used it, through the theory of ideas, to explain the real and unreal in the phenomena of nature. E. Socrates used it in order to establish the fact of immortality by showing that the death of one form of life of existing things is but the beginning of another form of life of these things. In other words, life is perpetual. It only changes its forms in its course of progress. Democritus applied the principle of opposites in their interpretation of a particular phase of reality. We cannot therefore consider Aristotle's use of the terms actuality and potentiality in the problem of the existence of God as a new method of interpretation. Furthermore, Aristotle's review of the doctrines of all previous philosophers, including Plato, together with his exposure of their errors and inconsistencies, shows that he had become confident not only of the fact that he was in possession of a new and correct knowledge, one that had not been before made available to the Greeks, but also that he could then speak with great authority. Right here I must say that I am convinced that Aristotle represents a culture gap of 5,000 years or more between his civilization, innovation, and the Greek level of civilization, because it is impossible to escape the conviction that he obtained his education in books from a nation outside of Greece, the Egyptians, who were far in advance of the culture of Greeks of his day. 3. The doctrine of the origin of the world. according to the doctrine that has been ascribed to Aristotle, because matter, motion, and time are eternal, therefore the world is also eternal. He plainly accepts and repeats a doctrine which has also been ascribed to Democritus, 400 BC, whose dictum we are all quite familiar with. Ex nihilo nihil fit. Nothing comes out of nothing, and consequently matter or the world must always have existed. But the antiquity of the doctrine of the eternal nature of matter takes us back to the creation story of the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, in which chaos is represented by the primeval ocean Nun, out of which there arose the primeval hill Tategenin. Under these circumstances, we cannot give Aristotle credit for the authorship of this doctrine. In addition to the false authorship that has been attributed to Aristotle, he contradicts himself in his Physics 8:1-25, when he also speaks of the world as caused. A thing cannot be eternal and infinite and at the same time finite. 4. The doctrine of the attributes of nature. Aristotle defines nature as that which possesses the principle of motion and rest, and also adds that the motion is an effort to move from the less perfect to the more perfect by a definite law, supposedly what we would today call evolution. As we examine this definition, we find that Aristotle has only applied the principle of opposites to explain one of the modes by which nature has revealed herself, just as he has done in his attempt to explain being in the dual terms of actuality and potentiality. But change and motion, permanence and rest were by no means new problems at the time of Aristotle, since they appear to have been investigated not only by Parmenides, Zeno, and Melissus, but also by Democritus, who stressed the notion of permanence in his famous dictum ex nihilo nihil fit, out of nothing nothing comes, implying thereby that nature is permanent and eternal. Similarly, his reference to nature's movement from the less perfect to the more perfect was by no means a new discovery of a principle of nature. The creation account found in the first chapter of Genesis speaks of the gradual development of life, in which the demiurge, or logos, was engaged at work during 6 stages and rested on the 7th. Similarly, the creation account of the Egyptians found in the Memphite theology also speaks of nature's movement from chaos to order. These accounts, by many thousand years, antedate Aristotle's time, for the former is about 2000 BC, while the latter 4000 BC. And since the principle of opposites has already been shown to originate from the Egyptians, as well as that of the gradual development of life, it is clear that this doctrine on the attributes of nature did not originate from Aristotle. 5. The soul. According to Aristotle, the soul possesses the following attributes. 1. Identity with body, as form with matter. 2. The power which a living body possesses, i.e. the radical principle of life, manifesting itself in the following attributes. A. Sensitive. B. Rational. C. Nutritive. D. Appetitive. E. Locomotive. The description of the soul by Aristotle seems to vary somewhat from the more familiar and current ideas held by the atomists on the one hand, and Socrates, Plato, and the Pythagoreans on the other. For while the former believed that the soul is material and is composed of fire atoms, the latter regarded it as a harmony of the body and a blending of opposites. Naturally, we are now forced to ask the question, did this doctrine of the soul originate from Aristotle? It is clear that he did not get it from his teacher Plato, nor from the Pythagoreans and atomists, but from some other source outside of Greece. As we turn our attention to ancient history, we happily discover that there are two such sources outside of Greece. One, the creation story in Genesis, first chapter, and two, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which does not only contain attributes of the soul identical with those mentioned by Aristotle, but far more in an elaborate system of philosophy in which human nature is explained as a unity of 9 inseparable parts consisting of different bodies and souls interdependent one upon another, the physical body being one of them. The Egyptian Book of the Dead by Sir E. A. Budge, Introduction, pages 29 to 64. In the Genesis story, it is asserted that God made man out of matter, i.e. the dust of the earth, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and, quote, man became a living soul. Here we have a clear statement of the identity of body and soul, taken from a document, Genesis, which antedates Aristotle by many centuries. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, we also find that the human soul is composed of the following 9 inseparable parts. 1. The Ka, which is an abstract personality of the man to whom it belongs, possessing the form and attributes of a man with power of locomotion, omnipresence, and ability to receive nourishment like a man. It is equivalent to Eidolon, i.e. image. 2. The Khat, i.e. the concrete personality, the physical body which is mortal. 3. The Ba, i.e. the heart, soul, which dwells in the Ka and sometimes alongside it, in order to supply it with air and food. It has the power of metamorphosis and changes its form at will. 4. The Ab, i.e. the heart, the animal life in man, and is rational, spiritual, and ethical. It is associated with the Ba, heart, soul, and in the Egyptian judgment drama it undergoes examination in the presence of Osiris, the great judge of the unseen world. 5. The Kaibit, i.e. shadow. It is associated with Ba, heart, soul, from whom, like the Ka, it receives its nourishment. It has the power of locomotion and omnipresence. 6. The Ku, i.e. spiritual soul, which is immortal. It is also closely associated with the Ba, heart, soul, and is an ethereal being. 7. The Sahu, i.e. spiritual body, in which the Ku, or spiritual soul, dwells. In it all the mental and spiritual attributes of the natural body are united to the new powers of its own nature. E. The Sekhem, i.e. power, or the spiritual personification of the vital force in man. Its dwelling place is in the heavens with the spirits, or Kus. 9. The Ren, i.e. the name, or the essential attribute for the preservation of a being. The Egyptians believed that in the absence of a name, an individual ceased to exist. It must be noted that according to the Egyptian concept, 1. The soul has 9 parts, whose unity is so complete that even the Ren, i.e. the name, is an essential attribute, since without it, it cannot exist. 2. The Ba, or heart soul, is connected with the Ka, Kaibit, and Ab, abstract personality or shadow and animal life, on the one hand, and also with Ku and Sekhem, spiritual soul and spiritual personification of vital force, on the other hand, as the power of nourishment. 3. The Sahu is a spiritual body which is used both by Ku and Sekhem. 4. The Khat, i.e. the physical body, is essential to the soul while manifesting itself upon the physical plane. 5. The soul has the additional following attributes: A. Omnipresence. B. Metamorphosis. C. Locomotion. D. Nutritive. E. Mortality. F. Immortality. G. Rationality. H. Spirituality. I. Morality. J. Ethereal. K. Shadowy. 6. It is clear, therefore, from such a comparison as this, that the Aristotelian doctrine of the soul is identical and coincides with only a very small portion of the Egyptian philosophy of the soul, which therefore stands in relation to it as a whole to its parts. Consequently, we must conclude that Aristotle obtained his doctrine of the soul from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, directly or indirectly. B. The library at Alexandria was the true source of Aristotle's large numbers of books. It is to be expected that the library of Alexandria was immediately ransacked and looted by Alexander and his party, no doubt made up of Aristotle and others, who did not only carry off large quantities of scientific books, but also frequently returned to Alexandria for the purpose of research. Just as these books were captured in Egypt by the army of Alexander and fell into the hands of Aristotle, so after Aristotle's death these very books were destined to be captured by a Roman army and conveyed to Rome, according to the following story taken from the histories of Strabo and Plutarch. The books of Aristotle fell into the hands of Theophrastus, who succeeded him as head of his school. At the death of Theophrastus, they were bequeathed to Nilus of Skepsis. After the death of Nilus, the books were hidden in a cellar, where they remained for almost 2 centuries. When Athens was captured by the Romans in 84 BC, the books were captured by Sulla and carried to Rome, where Tyrannio, a grammarian, secured copies and enabled Andronicus of Rhodes to publish them. The fragmentary character of Aristotle's writings and their lack of unity reveal the fact that he himself made notes hurriedly from books while doing his research at the great Egyptian library. The ancient teaching method was oral, not by lecture and note-taking. Right here, I must repeat that I am convinced that Aristotle represents a culture gap of 5,000 years between his innovation and the Greek level of civilization, because it is impossible to escape the conviction that he obtained his education and books from a nation outside of Greece, who was far ahead of the culture of the Greeks of his day, and that was the Egyptians. The so-called books of Aristotle deal with scientific knowledge which was not in circulation among the Greeks, and consequently it was impossible, as has already been stated, for him to have purchased them from other so-called Greek philosophers. It is for the purpose of concealing the true source of his books and of his education that history tells the very strange stories about Aristotle. A. That he spent 20 years as a pupil under Plato, whom we know was incompetent to teach him. And B. That Alexander the Great also gave him money to buy the large number of books to which his name has been attached, but at the same time fails to tell us when, where, and from whom Aristotle bought the books. Furthermore, as already pointed out, Aristotle's review of the doctrines of all previous philosophers, including Plato, together with his exposure of their errors and inconsistencies, shows that he had become confident not only of the fact that he was in possession of correct knowledge, one that had not before been made available to the Greeks, but also that he could then speak with great authority. B. The lack of uniformity between the list of books points to doubtful authorship. 1. there are at least 3 lists of books. One list is said to be Aristotle's own classification of his writings, and naturally it must be dated within the period of his own lifetime, 384 to 322 BC. In this list, Aristotle has told the world that he wrote text on A. Mathematics, physics and theology, B. Ethics, economics and politics, and C. Poetry, art and rhetoric. Now, in order to write these texts, one must have received his education and training in the subjects on which they are written. We are told in the history of Greek philosophy that Socrates taught Plato and that Plato taught Aristotle. But there is no evidence that Socrates ever taught mathematics or economics or politics. Consequently, it was impossible for him to teach Plato these subjects, and also impossible for Plato to teach Aristotle these subjects. Under the Egyptian mystery system, which was graded and which required proof of efficiency before promotion, we are therefore unable to accept the claim of Aristotle to have been the author of those books. 2 lists are derived from different sources, and the 2 together differ widely in A. number, B. subject matter, and C. date. The list of Hermippus the Alexandrine, 200 BC, contains 400 books. The list compiled by Ptolemy between 1st and 2nd centuries AD contains 1,000 books. The very fact that there is no uniformity in the list points to a doubtful authorship. Also, if Aristotle in 200 BC had only 400 books, by what miracle did they increase to 1,000 in the 2nd century AD? Or was it forgery? C. The discrepancies and doubts in his life. 1. He wastes 20 years as a pupil under Plato. It is said that he went to Plato at the age of 19 and spent 20 years with him as a pupil. But this is doubtful and unreasonable. Doubtful because Plato is regarded as a philosopher, while Aristotle as a scientist, who has been credited with all the scientific knowledge of the ancient world. And it is impossible for a master to teach a pupil what he himself does not know. It is also unreasonable to expect a man who has been credited with Aristotle's knowledge to waste 20 of the best years of his life under a master who was incompetent to teach him. 2. The truth of how he got such a large number of books is misrepresented. He is said to have received financial aid from Alexander the Great, and was able to purchase a large number of books in order to advance his studies. But this sounds more like a fable than the truth, for up to the time of Aristotle, Greek education was represented by the sophists, who taught rhetoric and dialectics, while the study of elementary science was confined to a few unknown philosophers. This was the standard of Greek education, for the sophists were the only authorized teachers. Yet Aristotle is credited with producing 1,000 different books dealing with all branches of the scientific knowledge of antiquity. Certainly he could not have obtained them from the Greeks, for that vast body of knowledge which bears his name and which was presented as new would really have been the traditional common possession of all who were members of the Greek schools of philosophy, for they would have been the only persons inside Greece permitted to own such books, for knowledge was protected as secret. Under these circumstances, it is evident that the vast body of scientific knowledge ascribed to Aristotle was neither in the possession of the Greeks of his time, nor was there any one in Greece competent to teach him science, and least of all, on so vast a scale. 3. He got the books by looting the library of Alexandria. The The question must now be asked, how did Aristotle, a single individual, come to possess such a vast number of scientific works, a body of knowledge which took the ancient world 5,000 years or more to accumulate? It is evident that Aristotle's fame as a scholar has been grossly exaggerated, for such an accomplishment would have been both a physical and mental impossibility. Throughout the intellectual advancement of man, the world has witnessed many a genius, but those have always been specialists in particular fields, not specialists in every branch of science. And the modern world is no exception. For our great men of science are not specialists in every branch of science, but only in a particular one. That appears to be nature's way. As a matter of fact, the many discrepancies and doubts in the life and activities of Aristotle lead us to the only reasonable solution of the problem, that instead of the tales, A, that Alexander the Great gave him money to buy books, B, that he spent 20 years of his life as a pupil with Plato, and C, that he left the palace of Alexander for Athens when Alexander started on his Egyptian invasion, he, on the contrary, must have spent a large part of those 20 years under the tutorship of the Egyptian priest, and also must have accompanied Alexander on the Egyptian invasion, which gave him the opportunity not only to carry away from the Alexandrian library the vast number of books which are now said to be his, but also to copy notes from a large number of volumes. Indeed, modern scholarship has shown that the writings of Aristotle bear all the marks of hurriedly copied notes, which of course suggest that Aristotle himself copied these notes from the books of the Alexandrian library. The historical account of Aristotle's life is incredible. For it was the custom of ancient armies to capture books as valuable war booty. When a victorious army takes possession of a country, it is customary for special companies to search for and seize war booty, i.e., to help themselves to everything that is considered valuable. The Greeks, among all the surrounding nations, were the most anxious to obtain the valuable secrets of the Egyptians in the ancient sciences, and it would appear that the greatest opportunity came to them to accomplish the desire when Alexander the Great invaded Egypt. As stated elsewhere, ancient invading armies looted libraries because of the great value attached to books, and temples were also looted, not only for books but also for the gold and silver, out of which the gods and ceremonial vessels were made. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Curriculum of the Egyptian Mystery System. 1. The education of the Egyptian priests according to their orders. From Diodorus, Herodotus, and Clement of Alexandria, we learn that there were 6 orders of Egyptian priests, and that each order had to master a certain number of the books of Hermes. Clement has described a procession of the priests, calling them by their order, and stating their qualifications as follows. First comes the singer Otis, bearing an instrument of music. He has to know by heart 2 of the books of Hermes, one containing the hymns of the gods, and the other the allotment of the king's life. Next comes the horoscopus, carrying in his hand a horologium or sundial and a palm branch, the symbols of astronomy. He has to know 4 of the books of Hermes, which deal with astronomy. Next comes the hierogrammet, with feathers on his head, and a book in his hand, and a rectangular case with writing materials, i.e., the writing ink and the reed. He has to know the hieroglyphics, cosmography, geography, astronomy, the topography of Egypt, the sacred utensils and measures, the temple furniture, and the lands. Next comes the stolistes, carrying the cubit of justice and the libation vessels. He has to know the books of Hermes that deal with the slaughter of animals. Next comes the prophets, carrying the vessel of water, followed by those who carry the loaves. The prophets is the president of the temple and has to know the 10 books which are called hieratic and contain the laws and doctrines concerning the gods, secret theology, and the whole education of the priest. The books of Hermes are 42 in number and are absolutely necessary. 36 of them have to be known by the orders which precede and contain the whole philosophy of the Egyptians. The remaining 6 books must be known by the order of pastophori. These are medical books and deal with physiology, male and female diseases, anatomy, drugs, and instruments. The books of Hermes were well known to the ancient world and were known to Clement of Alexandria, who lived at the beginning of the 3rd century A.D. In addition to the education contained in the 42 books of Hermes, the priest gained considerable knowledge from the selection and examination of sacrificial victims and the strict bodily purity which their priestly office imposed. In addition to the hierogrammet and horoscopist, who were skilled in theology and hieroglyphics, a priest was also a judge and an interpreter of the law. This led to a select tribunal, which made the Egyptian priest the custodian of every kind of literature. We are also told that the science of statistics was cultivated to the greatest perfection among the Egyptian priests. 2. The education of the Egyptian priests in A. The 7 liberal arts, B. Secret systems of languages and mathematical symbolism, C. Magic. A. The education of the Egyptian priest in the 7 liberal arts. As has already been pointed out, in connection with Plato and the cardinal virtues, the Egyptian mysteries were the center of organized culture and the recognized source of education in the ancient world. Neophytes were graded according to their moral efficiency and intellectual competence, and had to submit to many years of tests and ordeals in order that their eligibility for advancement might be determined. Their education included the 7 liberal arts and the virtues. The virtues were not mere abstractions or ethical sentiments, but positive valors and the virility of the soul. Beyond these, the priest entered upon a course of specialization. B. The education of the Egyptian priest consisted also in the specialization in secret systems of language and mathematical symbolism. 1. It would appear that there were 2 forms of writing in use among the Egyptians. A. The Demotic, believed to have been introduced by Pharaoh Psammetichus for trade and commercial purposes, and B. The hieroglyphics, of which there were 2 forms, i.e. the hieroglyphics proper and the hieratic, a linear form, both of which were used only by the priest in order to conceal the secret and mystical meaning of their doctrines. 2. We are also informed that the mystery system of Egypt employed modes of spoken language which could be understood only by the initiated. These consisted not only of myths and parables, but also of a secret language called Senzar. 3. We also understand that the Egyptians attached numerical values both to letters of words and to geometrical figures, with the same intention as with their use of hieroglyphics, i.e. to conceal their teachings. It is further understood that the Egyptian numerical and geometrical symbolism were contained in the 42 books of Hermes, whose system was the oldest and most elaborate repository of mathematical symbolism. Here, again, we are reminded of the source of the number philosophy of Pythagoras. C. The education of the Egyptian priest consisted also in the specialization in magic. According to Herodotus, the Egyptian priests possessed supernatural powers, for they had been trained in the esoteric philosophy of the greater mysteries, and were experts in magic. They had the power of controlling the minds of men, hypnosis, the power of predicting the future, prophecy, and the power over nature, i.e., the power of gods, by giving commands in the name of the divinity and accomplishing great deeds. Herodotus also tells us that the most celebrated oracles of the ancient world were located in Egypt. Hercules at Canopus, Apollo at Apollonopolis Magna, Minerva at Sais, Diana at Bubastis, Mars at Papremis, and Jupiter at Thebes and Ammonium, and that the Greek oracles were Egyptian imitations. Here it might be well to mention that the Egyptian priests were the first genuine priests of history who exercised control over the laws of nature. Here it might also be well to mention that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a book of magical formulae and instructions intended to direct the fate of the departed soul. It was the prayer book of the mystery system of Egypt, and the Egyptian priests received training in post-mortem conditions and the methods of their verification. 3. A comparison of the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery system with the lists of books attributed to Aristotle. A. The curriculum. The curriculum of the Egyptian mystery system consisted of the following subjects. 1. The 7 liberal arts, which formed the foundation training for all neophytes, and included grammar, arithmetic, rhetoric and dialectic, i.e. the quadrivium, and geometry, astronomy, and music, i.e. the trivium. 2. The sciences of the 42 books of Hermes. In addition to the foundation training prescribed for all neophytes, those who sought holy orders had to be versed in the books of Hermes, and according to Clement of Alexandria, their orders and subjects were as follows. A. The singer or odist, who must know 2 books of Hermes dealing with music, i.e. the hymns of the gods. B. The horoscopist, who must know 4 books of Hermes dealing with astronomy. C. The hierogrammist, who must know the hieroglyphics, cosmography, geography, astronomy, and the topography of Egypt and land surveying. D. The stolistist, who must know the books of Hermes that deal with slaughter of animals and the process of embalming. E. The prophetess, who is the president of the temple, and must know 10 books of Hermes dealing with higher esoteric theology and the whole education of priests. F. The pastophori, who must know 6 books of Hermes, which are medical books, dealing with physiology, the diseases of male and female, anatomy, drugs, and instruments. 3. The sciences of the monuments, pyramids, temples, libraries, obelisks, sphinxes, idols. Architecture, masonry, carpentry, engineering, sculpture, metallurgy, agriculture, mining, and forestry. Art, drawing and painting. 4. The secret sciences, numerical symbolism, geometrical symbolism, magic, the Book of the Dead, myth, and parables. 5. The social order and its protection. The priests of Egypt were also lawyers, judges, officials of government, businessmen, and sailors and captains. Hence, they must have been trained in economics, civics, law, government, statistics, census taking, navigation, shipbuilding, military science, the manufacture of chariots, and horse breeding. If we compare 3a with 3b, which immediately follows, we would discover that the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery system covered a much wider range of scientific subjects than those of Aristotle's list, which it includes. Note also that the 7 liberal arts, the quadrivium and trivium, originated from the Egyptian mysteries. B. Aristotle's list of books prepared by himself. 1. Aristotle is said to have prepared a list of books in the following order. 1. Theoretic, whose purpose was truth and which included A. Mathematics, B. Physics, and C. Theology. 2. Practical, whose purpose was usefulness and which included ethics, economics, politics. And 3. Poetic or productive, whose purpose was beauty and which included poetry, art, and rhetoric. An examination and comparison of 3a with 3b show that A. The curriculum of the Egyptian mystery school included all the scientific and philosophic subjects credited to the authorship of Aristotle. B. The books attributed to Aristotle's authorship cannot be disassociated from Egyptian origin, as elsewhere referred to, both through the plunder of the Royal Library of Alexandria and through research carried on at the center by Aristotle himself. As has been mentioned elsewhere, the writings of Aristotle are disputed by modern scholarship, and I feel more justified in making the comparison between the curriculum of the mystery system and the list said to be drawn up by Aristotle himself, rather than with the notorious list of 1,000 books whose subjects are nevertheless included under the curriculum of the Egyptian mystery system. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Memphite theology is the basis of all important doctrines in Greek philosophy. History and description. The Memphite theology is an inscription on a stone now kept in the British Museum. It contains the theological, cosmological, and philosophical views of the Egyptians. It has already been referred to in my treatment of Plato's doctrines, but it must be repeated here to show its full importance as the basis of the entire field of Greek philosophy. It is dated 700 BC and bears the name of an Egyptian pharaoh who stated that he had copied an inscription of his ancestors. This statement is verified by language and typical arrangement of the text, and therefore assigns the original date of the Memphite theology to a very early period of Egyptian history, i.e., the time when the first dynasties had made their new capital at Memphis, the city of the god Ptah, i.e., between 4000 and 3500 BC. The text. This consists of 3 supplementary parts, each of which will be treated separately, both as regards its teachings and the identity in Greek philosophy. Part 1 presents the gods of chaos. Part 2 presents the gods of order and arrangement in creation. And Part 3 presents the primate of the gods, or the God of gods, through whose logos creation was accomplished. In Part 1, pre-creation or chaos is represented as follows. A. Text of Part 1. The primate of the gods Ptah conceived in his heart everything that exists, and by his utterance created them all. He is first to emerge from the primeval waters of Nun in the form of a primeval hill. Closely following the hill, the god Atum also emerges from the waters and sits upon Ptah, the hill. There remain in the waters 4 pairs of male and female gods. The Ogdod, or unity of 8 gods, bearing the following names: 1. Nun and Nonet, i.e. the primeval waters and the counter heaven. 2. Ha and Hahet, i.e. the boundless and its opposite. 3. Kuk and Korket, i.e. darkness and its opposite. And 4. Amun, i.e. Ammon, and Amonet, i.e. the hidden and its opposite. B. The philosophy of Part 1. 1. Ptah has the following attributes. A. The primate of the gods, i.e. the god of gods. B. The logos, thought and creative utterance and power. C. The god of order and form. D. The divine artificer and potter. It must be noted that while the sun god Adam sits upon Ptah, the primeval hill, he accomplishes the work of creation. But the Memphite theology dates back to 4000 BC, when it is believed the Greeks were unknown. The arrangement in the Memphite theology could only mean that the ingredients of the primeval chaos contained 10 principles, 4 pairs of opposite principles together with 2 other gods, Ptah representing mind, thought, and creative utterance, while Atum joins himself to Ptah and acts as a demiurge and executes the work of creation. From such an arrangement in the cosmos, we are in position to infer the following philosophies. A. Water is the source of all things. B. Creation was accomplished by the unity of 2 creative principles, Ptah and Atum, i.e. the unity of mind, nous, with logos, creative utterance. Atum was the demiurge or intermediate god in creation. He was also sun god or fire god. D. Opposite principles control the life of the universe. E. The elements in creation were fire, Atum, water, Nun, earth, Ptah, and air. Part 1 of the Memphite theology is the correct source of these philosophies, but strangely the Greeks have claimed them as their productions, although without any right whatever. C. Individual Greek philosophers to whom portions of the philosophy of the Memphite theology has been assigned. Of these doctrines, water as the source of all things has been assigned to Thales. That of the boundless or unlimited has been assigned to Anaximander, while that of air as the basis of life has been assigned to Anaximenes. Furthermore, the doctrine that fire underlies the life of the universe has been assigned not only to Pythagoras, who spoke of the functions of the central and peripheral fires, but also to Heraclitus, who spoke of the transmutation of fire into the other elements, and their transmutation back into fire. Also, Democritus, who spoke of fire atoms as filling space as the mind or soul of the world, and Plato, who spoke of a world soul which is composed of fire atoms. Likewise, the doctrine of opposites has been assigned not only to Pythagoras, who spoke of the elements of the unit as odd and even, but also to A. Heraclitus, who spoke of the unity of warring opposites. B. Parmenides, who spoke of the distinction between being and not being. C. Socrates, who spoke of things as being generated from their opposites. And D. Plato, who spoke of ideas and noumena as real and perfect, but phenomena as unreal and imperfect. Furthermore, the doctrines of the nous, or mind, or an intelligent agency as responsible for creation, has been assigned not only to Anaxagoras, but also to Socrates, who spoke of the existence of useful things as the work of an intelligence, to Plato, who spoke of a world soul or mind as the cause of life and knowledge in the universe, and to Democritus, who attached a similar meaning. The doctrine of the Logos has been assigned to Heraclitus, who spoke of fire as the Logos, or creative principle in nature, while the doctrine of the Demiurge, or an intermediate God who created the world, has been assigned to Plato. A. Text of Part 2. The gods of order and arrangement in the cosmos are represented by 9 gods in one Godhead, called the Ennead. Here, Atum, the source of the Ogdoad, is also retained as the source of the gods of order and arrangement. Atum names 4 pairs of parts of his own body, and thus creates 8 gods, who together with himself become 9. These 8 gods are the created gods, the first creatures of this world, and Atum, the creator god, the demiurge of whom Plato spoke. The gods whom Atum projected from his body were 1. Shu, air, 2. Tefnut, moisture, 3. Geb, earth, and 4. Nut, sky, who are said to have given birth to 4 other gods. 5. Osiris, the god of omnipotence and omniscience. 6. Isis, wife of Osiris, female principle. 7. Seth, the opposite of good. 8. Nephthys, female principle in the unseen world. B. The philosophy of Part 2. As we read the text of Part 2, we find that the sun god Atum, who was present in the chaos, was also present at the development of orderly arrangement in the cosmos. At this stage, Atum assumes the role of creator of all gods except Ptah, the god of gods. He next proceeds to accomplish this special type of creation in the following manner. He commands 8 gods to proceed from his own body, according to the names of those 8 parts. The result of this creation presents us with what has been called A. The Ennead, or the unity of 9 gods in one Godhead. B. The doctrine of the Demiurge, as in Part 1. C. The doctrine of the created gods. And D. The doctrine of the unmoved mover. Also, E. The doctrine of opposites. And F. Omnipotence and omniscience. Of these doctrines, that of the Ennead will be dealt with elsewhere, and since the doctrine of the Demiurge has already been treated, together with C. the created gods, I shall now discuss the doctrine of the unmoved mover as based upon the same act of creation. According to the Memphite theology of the Egyptians, Atum created 8 gods who proceeded from the 8 parts of his own body. He was seated upon Ptah, the hill, and was unmoved. In this act of creation, Atum became the unmoved mover. In spite of the Memphite theology being the direct source of these doctrines, yet Plato has been given credit for the doctrine of the created gods, while Aristotle has received credit for that of the unmoved mover. Certainly the world has never been more misled. Here it must be made quite clear that the doctrine of a demiurge in creation includes 2 other doctrines, that of the created gods and that of the unmoved mover. It was the function of the demiurge to create the universe, and in doing so, his first act was the creation of the gods, who accordingly became the first creatures. But the manner in which the demiurge created the gods was the process of projecting them from his own body. This method of creation clearly makes the demiurge the unmoved mover. However, the history of Greek philosophy has assigned the authorship of the doctrines of the demiurge and the created gods to Plato, and the authorship of the doctrine of the unmoved mover to Aristotle. But this so-called Platonic doctrine is one, made up of 3 inseparable parts: A. The demiurge, B. The function of the demiurge, and C. The method of the function, a unity which contradicts Aristotle's authorship of what is really only an inference from the supposed original doctrine of Plato. The doctrine of opposites has already been discussed. However, in part 1 of the Memphite theology, one of the pairs of created gods, Osiris and Isis, was used to represent the male and female principles of nature. In addition to this, Osiris had other qualities attached to him, which might be understood from the following derivatives: A. Ash, meaning many, and B. Iri, meaning to do, and also C, meaning an eye. Consequently, Osiris came to mean not only many-eyed or omniscient, but also omnipotent or all-powerful. Here again, as in all instances already mentioned, in spite of the fact that Memphite theology is the source of Greek philosophy, yet the doctrines of an intelligent cause, a nous as responsible for the life and conduct of the world, has been assigned to Anaxagoras, Socrates, and also Plato, whose world soul consisted of fire atoms like the world soul of Democritus. A. Text of Part 3. In this third part of the Memphite theology, the primate of the gods is represented as Ptah, thought, logos, and creative power which are exercised over all creatures. He transmits power and spirit to all gods and controls the lives of all things, animals and men, through his thought and commands. In other words, it is him that all things live, move, and have their being. B. The philosophy of Part 3. From Part 3, we infer the following doctrines. A. All things were created by the thought and command of Ptah, the God of gods. B. Through the thought and command of Ptah, we all live, move, and have our eternal being. C. Ptah is creator and preserver, as has already been pointed out elsewhere. Ptah's powers were transmitted by magical means to Atum, who performed the work of creation. 2. Memphite theology is the source of modern scientific knowledge. A. The Ennead and the nebular hypothesis. B. The identity between the sun god Atum and the atom of science. A. The Ennead and the nebular hypothesis coincide. Just as the Memphite theology is the source of Greek philosophy or primitive science, so it is also the basis of modern scientific belief. The gods of order and arrangement in the cosmos are represented by 9 gods in the Godhead, called the Ennead. Atum, the sun god, i.e., fire god, creates 8 other gods by naming 4 pairs of parts of his own body from which they came forth. Here, the names of the created gods were given as Shu and Tefnut, air and moisture, Geb and Nut, earth and sky, and 2 other pairs of opposites, Osiris and Isis, and Seth and Nephthys, who are supposed to be the first creatures of this world. Now, if we compare this Egyptian cosmology with the nebular hypothesis of Laplace, we would find very striking similarities in the 2 contexts. According to the nebular hypothesis, our present solar system was once a molten gaseous nebula. This nebula rotated at an enormous speed, and as the mass cooled down, it also contracted and developed greater speed. The result was a bulging at the equator and a gradual breaking off of gaseous rings which formed themselves into planets. These planets in turn threw off gaseous rings which formed themselves into smaller bodies until at last the sun was left as the remnant of the original parent nebula. From this context, it is clear that the original parent nebula was fire, or the sun, and that by throwing off parts of itself, it created some planets, which in turn threw off parts of themselves and created others. According to the context of the Memphite theology, the creator god was the sun god or fire god Atum, who named 4 pairs of parts of his own body from which gods came forth. But Atum, together with the 8 created gods, composed the Ennead, or Godhead of 9. A very striking similarity with modern science, which teaches that there are 9 major planets. We may now summarize these similarities. A. The creator god in both the Egyptian and modern cosmologies is the sun or fire. B. The creator god in both cosmologies creates gods from parts of himself. C. The number of gods are 9 and correspond with the 9 major planets. These similarities make it evident that Laplace obtained his hypothesis from the Memphite theology or other Egyptian sources. Of course, the Memphite theology, according to Frankfurt in his Intellectual Adventure of Ancient Man, page 54, does not mention the creation of planets. Nevertheless, since it was the method of the Egyptian to conceal the truth by the use of myth, parables, magical principles, number philosophy, and hieroglyphics, we can easily see what methods might be involved before we could arrive at a better translation of the Memphite theology. At any rate, the entire setting of the Memphite theology is astronomical, and what could be more natural than to expect an astronomical interpretation? It seems well within reason to regard the Ennead as the heliocentric system of history. Atum, the sun god, creating 8 other gods or planets from his own body as the unmoved mover, a teaching which has been falsely attributed to Aristotle. B. The identity between the Egyptian sun god Atum and the atom of modern science. There are two things which I desire to point out in connection with the relationship between Atum, the Egyptian sun god, and the atom of modern science. These things are 1. The similarity of attributes, and 2. The similarity of names. 1. The Egyptian god Atum means self-created, everything and nothing, a combination of positive and negative principles, all-inclusiveness and emptiness, a demiurge possessing creative powers, the creator's son. Atum also means the all and the not yet being. As a god, Atum represents the principles of opposites. The atom, as the substratum of matter, according to Greek philosophy, is defined by Democritus as movement of that which is within that which is not. It therefore represents the principle of opposites and shows the identity between the Egyptian sun god and the substratum of matter. Furthermore, the atom is defined as the full and void, being and not being, and these definitions coincide with the everything and nothing and the all-inclusiveness and emptiness of the Egyptian sun god. 2. The similarity of names shared by the Egyptian sun god and the atom of science. Now, with reference to the similarity of these two names, the first thing we should bear in mind is the fact that they both possess identical attributes, as has already been pointed out in Section 1. And consequently, we are compelled to conclude that the atom of science is the identical name of the Egyptian sun god, the most ancient of the gods except Ptah, who was present with Atum at creation. The second thing we should bear in mind is the fact that the name of the god Atum belongs to the cosmology of the Memphite theology, whose date goes back to 4000 BC, when the Greeks were not even known. Consequently, we are compelled to conclude that the Greeks obtained both the original name and the attributes of the sun god Atum from the Egyptians. Furthermore, the Greeks were unacquainted with the Egyptian language during the period of the so-called Greek philosophy dating from the 6th century BC, and as a consequence transliterated Egyptian words into Greek without regard to their Coptic derivatives. The following Homeric stories verify the practice of the Greeks in their transliteration of Egyptian words and the plagiarism of their legend. A. According to Homer, Proteus was a maritime divinity feeding his phocae on the coast of Egypt. He was endowed with the gift of prophecy, which was exercised only upon compulsion. Proteus, however, was an Egyptian pharaoh who succeeded to the throne on the death of Pharaoh, the son of Sesostris. Proteus was also worshipped at Memphis. The Greeks did not only transliterate the name of this Egyptian king, but also plagiarized on the legend. B. Likewise, the story of Io, the Argive princess, who was changed into a heifer, and after long wanderings reached Egypt, where she gave birth to a god, and where she herself was worshipped as the goddess Isis, points clearly to the introduction of the worship of Isis or Hathor under the symbol of the heifer at an early period into Argos. Here it must be pointed out that Io is the Coptic name for moon, and the same word was preserved as the dialect of Argos, without any affinity with any Greek root. it was a habit of the Greeks to Hellenize Egyptian words by transliterating them and adding them to the Greek vocabulary. C. This practice of borrowing words from nearby nations continued until New Testament times. In Acts of Apostles of the Greek Testament, chapter 13 and verse 1, the word Niger, i.e. black man, in the name Simeon the Negro is a Roman or Latin word. Niger, Nigra, Nigrum, meaning black. Simeon, of course, was an Egyptian professor attached to the church at Rome. The atom of science is really the name of the Egyptian sun god that has come down to modern times through the so-called Greek philosophy and carries identical attributes with the sun god. It must be remembered that what we erroneously call Greek philosophy was the beginning of science or the investigation of nature, and consequently we cannot separate modern science from Greek philosophy. 3. Modern Memphite theology opens great possibilities for modern scientific research. A. Greek concept of the atom. Erroneous. The Greeks derived the meaning of the atom from alpha, i.e. a negative prefix meaning not, and 2. Temnin, i.e. the present infinitive active of temno, to cut. The two derivatives together meaning that which cannot be cut. For centuries, the world has been misled by this misconception of the Greeks, a fact which no doubt had impeded the progress of atomic research by Western scholars, who had believed in the so-called Greek origin of philosophy or primitive science. Today, however, the Greek conception of the atom is no longer tenable, since modern science has successfully split the atom. B. Great scientific secrets in the Memphite theology yet to be discovered. I believe that the time has come within which man will be able to unlock most of the secrets of nature hitherto hidden and unknown. I have shown that the nebular hypothesis of modern times coincides with the teachings of the Memphite theology, in which the sun god Atum is said to have created 8 other gods, which together with himself constitute the Ennead of the Egyptians, which correspond to the 9 major planets of modern scientific teaching. We also know that out of the cosmic chaos there arose from the primeval waters a pair of gods, i.e. the primeval hill and Atum, the sun god, and that through the contact of Adam with the hill he received power to create the other 8 major planets. This seems to imply that 1. Atomic energy originates from water and earth. Since water, H2O, and uranium, an indispensable ingredient in atomic energy, is found in the bowels of the earth. Note that both Atum and the hill came out of the primeval waters. 2. 4 pairs of gods representing positive and negative principles still remain in the water, in the form of male and female, frogs and snakes, and constitutes 4/5 of the secrets of creation, which man has yet to fathom. 3. Successful scientific research in the principles and secrets of nature lies in the study of the Memphite theology, whose symbology requires the key of magical principles for its interpretation. With this approach, our men of science should be able to unlock the doors of the secrets of nature and become the custodians of unlimited knowledge. This is the legacy of the African continent to the nations of the world. She has laid the cultural foundations of modern progress, and therefore she and her people deserve the honor and praise which for centuries have been falsely given to the Greeks. And likewise, it is the purpose of this book to make this revelation the beginning of a universal reformation in race relations, which I believe would be the beginning of the solution of the problem of universal unrest. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9. Social Reformation through the New Philosophy of African Redemption. Now that it has been shown that philosophy and the arts and sciences were bequeathed to civilization by the people of North Africa and not by the people of Greece, the pendulum of praise and honor is due to shift from the people of Greece to the people of the African continent, who are the rightful heirs of such praise and honor. This is going to mean a tremendous change in world opinion and attitude for all people and races who accept the new philosophy of African redemption, i.e. the truth that the Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, would change their opinion from one of disrespect to one of respect for the black people throughout the world and treat them accordingly. It is also going to mean a most important change in the mentality of the black people, a change from an inferiority complex to the realization and consciousness of their equality with all the other great peoples of the world who have built great civilizations. With this change in the mentality of the black and white people, great changes are also expected in their respective attitudes toward each other and in society as a whole. In the drama of Greek philosophy, there are three actors who have played distinct parts, namely Alexander the Great, who by an act of aggression invaded Egypt in 333 BC and ransacked and looted the royal library at Alexandria, and together with his companions carried off a booty of scientific, philosophic, and religious books. Egypt was then stolen and annexed as a portion of Alexander's empire, but the invasion plan included far more than mere territorial expansion, for it prepared the way and made it possible for the capture of the culture of the African continent. This brings us to the second actor, that is, the school of Aristotle, whose students moved from Athens to Egypt and converted the royal library first into a research center, and secondly into a university, and thirdly compiled that vast body of scientific knowledge which they had gained from research together with the oral instructions which Greek students had received from the Egyptian priests into what they have called the history of Greek philosophy. In this way, the Greeks stole the legacy of the African continent and called it their own. And as has already been pointed out, the result of this dishonesty has been the creation of an erroneous world opinion that the African continent has made no contribution to civilization because her people are backward and low in intelligence and culture. This erroneous opinion about the black people has seriously injured them through the centuries up to modern times, in which it appears to have reached a climax in the history of human relations. And now we come to the third actor, and that is ancient Rome, who through the edicts of her emperors Theodosius in the 4th century AD and Justinian in the 6th century AD abolished the mysteries of the African continent, that is, the ancient culture system of the world. The higher metaphysical doctrines of those mysteries could not be comprehended. The spiritual powers of the priest were unsurpassed. The magic of the rites and ceremonies filled the people with awe. Egypt was the holy land of the ancient world, and the mysteries were the one ancient and holy Catholic religion whose powers were supreme. This lofty culture system of the black people filled Rome with envy, and consequently she legalized Christianity, which he had persecuted for 5 long centuries, and set it up as a state religion and as a rival of mysteries, its own mother. This is why the mysteries have been despised. This is why other ancient religions of the black people are despised, because they are all offspring of the African mysteries, which have never been clearly understood by Europeans, and consequently have provoked their prejudice and condemnation. In keeping with the plan of emperors Theodosius and Justinian to exterminate and forever suppress the culture system of the African continents, the Christian Church established its missionary enterprise to fight against what has called paganism. Consequently, missionaries and educators have gone to the mission field with a superiority complex, born of miseducation and disrespect, a prejudice which has made it impossible for them to accomplish the blessings which missionary enterprise might otherwise have accomplished. For this reason, missionary enterprise has been responsible for a positive injury against the African people, which consists of the perpetual caricature of African culture in literature and exhibitions which provoke laughter and disrespect. This, then, is only a brief summary of the parts played by the persons of the drama of Greek philosophy and the resultant effects upon the black people. This drama might be called the causa causarum of the social plight of the peoples of African descent, because it has made the white and black races not only common victims of a false racial tradition about the African continent, but also partners in the solution of the problems of racial reformation. I believe that a reformation of this kind is possible, if the best minds of both racial groups cooperate in its accomplishment. Both groups have been the common victims of miseducation arising from a false tradition about the African continent, and it has caused them to develop attitudes according to their common belief. The white people, a superiority complex, and the black people, the corresponding inferiority complex. And if we are to accomplish a reformation in race relations, it is obvious that both racial groups must combine their efforts in the abandonment and destruction of that mentality which has plunged the black people into their social plight. This, I suggest, should be done by a worldwide dissemination of the truth through a system of re-education in order to stimulate and encourage a change in the attitude of races toward each other. In combining their efforts, both races must not only preach and teach the truth that the mystery system of the African continent gave the world philosophy and religion, and the arts and sciences, but they must see to it that all false praise of the Greeks be removed from the textbooks of our schools and colleges. For this is the practice that has blindfolded the world, and has laid the foundations for the deplorable race relations of the modern world. A. The name of Pythagoras, for instance, should be deleted from our mathematical textbooks. In geometry, where the theorem of the square of the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is called the Pythagorean theorem, because this is not true. B. We must point out to the world the deception in attaching the authorship of Socrates to the precept, "Man, know thyself," and in attaching the authorship of Plato to the 4 cardinal virtues, since Socrates obtained the self-knowledge precept from the Egyptian temples, where it was used as an inscription, and Plato reduced the 10 virtues of the North African mystery system to 4. C. We must also prove to the world that the doctrines of the so-called Greek philosophies originated from the ancient mystery system of North Africa. This proof has been set forth in chapters 5 to 8 of Stolen Legacy, And in order to carry out our worldwide crusade, we must recommend Stolen Legacy for adoption and study in the schools and colleges of both racial groups, in our fraternities, sororities, and interracial groups, in order that young and old of our present generation might all get to know the truth and be able to pass it on to future generations. This, I believe, would be a very helpful method by which this process of re-education would become universal and effective in the creation of a much-needed racial reformation. The white people of our modern age cannot be regarded as wholly responsible for social conditions which are the result of false racial tradition. It is this that makes race relations a challenge to the best minds of both racial groups to combine their efforts in this solution. But our disturbed race relations have also another cause. This, I would say, is both supplementary and intensive, for the false tradition about the backwardness of the African continent, created by Alexander the Great and Aristotle's school, has been dramatized by missionary literature and exhibitions as the will of Roman emperors, and as a source of laughter and disrespect. There is no doubt that this policy has created bitterness and dissatisfaction in the minds of natives who have been compelled to question the sincerity of the missionary. In the meantime, missionary enterprise gains the sympathy and support of a miseducated world in order to carry on its program. What can we do to eradicate this second and more subtle evil? The dramatization of a false tradition so as to make it appear as true. I suggest that since the missionary dramatizes false tradition because he himself also believes it, we should combine our efforts, first of all, in re-educating him so that he might know the truth and change his superiority complex, which is responsible for his mistaken policy. His re-education should not only consist of a thorough study of the ideas and arguments contained in my book, Stolen Legacy, but he must also be given special training in the language, customs, and ideals of Africans, in order to make him cultivate an attitude of respect for the culture of the African continent, seemingly the oldest specimen to have been developed by mankind, because that continent is the birthplace and the cradle of the ancient mysteries. With a world enlightened as to the real truth about the place of the African continent in the history of civilization, false tradition and belief should cease to be effective. Disrespect and prejudice should tend to disappear, and race relations should tend to be normal and peaceful. This brings us to the final problem, the problem of African redemption. The aims of Stolen Legacy are not only to stimulate a reformation in race relations and scientific research, but also to cultivate race pride in the black people themselves, and to offer them a new philosophy of African redemption as the modus operandi of achieving racial reformation. This new philosophy of redemption consists of a simple proposition as follows. The Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the black people of North Africa, the Egyptians. Now, in order to explain the value of this proposition, 3 questions must be asked and answered. A. As a simple proposition, what is its significance? Its significance lies in the fact that it is a statement of an important truth, which is the exposure of Greek dishonesty. B. Why is this proposition called a philosophy? A philosophy is an accepted belief, and this proposition is a philosophy because it is offered as a belief worthy of acceptance. C. What is a philosophy of redemption? A philosophy of redemption is not merely an accepted belief, but a belief that is also lived in order to enjoy the benefits of its teaching. This proposition will become a philosophy of redemption to all black people when they accept it as a belief and live up to it. This brings us to our final question, and that is, how to live up to this philosophy of redemption. In other words, how shall the black people work out their own salvation? From the outset, my readers and co-workers in the solution of a common problem must be reminded that our philosophy of redemption is a psychological process involving a change in belief or mentality to be followed by a corresponding change in behavior. It really signifies a mental emancipation in which the black people will be liberated from the chain of traditional falsehood, which for centuries has incarcerated them in the prison of inferiority complex and world humiliation and insult. This mental emancipation or redemption, it must be remembered, has two functions. It is general when on the one hand the phenomenon of our unwholesome race relations is regarded as a general problem needing a general emancipation of both races in order to effect a solution. In this general sense, emancipation transcends the limitations and boundaries of race, and therefore includes the whole world, white and black people, since we are all victims of the same chain of the traditional falsehood that has incarcerated the modern world. On the other hand, emancipation or redemption is specific. When we refer to the effects of the phenomenon or unwholesome race relations upon the black people, it is freedom from such conditions that constitutes the specific function of emancipation or redemption. We digressed somewhat in order to explain the terms philosophy and philosophy of redemption, believing it to be necessary before proceeding to answer the next question: how to live up to this new philosophy of redemption. How must it be worked out? Being liberated from inferiority complex by their new philosophy of redemption, which is destined to destroy the chain of false tradition which has incarcerated them, the black people must face and interpret the world according to their new vision and philosophy. Throughout the centuries up to our modern times, world conditions have been influenced by two phenomena which have affected human relations. One, the giving of false praise to the Greeks, a custom which appears to be an educational policy conducted by educational institutions. This has led to the false worship of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle as intellectual gods in all the leading universities of the world. And in support of this intellectual worship, these institutions have also organized what are known as Greek-lettered fraternities and sororities, as the symbols of the superiority of Greek intellect and culture. 2. The second phenomenon is missionary enterprise, whereby the black people's culture has been caricatured in literature and exhibitions in such specimens as provoke disrespect and laughter. Never let us forget that the Roman emperors Theodosius and Justinian were responsible for the abolition of the Egyptian mysteries, that is, the culture system of the black people, and also for the establishment of Christianity for its perpetual suppression. Likewise, never let us forget, when we are reviewing this bit of history, that the Greeks called the Egyptians hoi aguptoi, which meant black people. In living up to their new philosophy of redemption, the life of the black people will have to be one of counteraction against these two sets of conditions. In the first place, the black people must adopt a negative attitude toward this type of phenomena, because they have become fully aware that these phenomena are the result of a false tradition, and therefore also partake of the nature of falsehood and insincerity. In this negative attitude, the black people of the world must shun the false tradition and must teach the truth, which is their new philosophy of redemption. This must be done in the home to young children, in the colleges and schools to students, from the pulpits and platforms to audiences, and in the fraternities and sororities to young men and women. This new philosophy of redemption, being a revelation of truth in the history of black people's civilization, must become a necessary portion of their education and must be taught for generations and centuries to come in order to fill them with inspiration and pride and liberate them from mental servitude. In the second place, in this negative attitude, the black people must demonstrate their disbelief in the false worship of Greek intellect. This should be done in the following 3 ways. 1. They must discontinue the practice of quoting Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in their speeches as intellectual models, because we know that their philosophy was stolen. 2. They must relinquish membership from all Greek-lettered fraternities and sororities. And 3. They must abolish all Greek-lettered fraternities and sororities from all colored colleges, because they have been a source of the promotion of inferiority complex and of educating the black people against themselves. We come now to the counteraction of the second set of phenomena, the missionary activities in defamatory literature and exhibitions which provoke disrespect for and laughter at the black people. Just as in the first set of phenomena, so is it in the second. The black people must adopt a negative attitude in their attempt to live up to their philosophy of redemption. Of course, they are perfectly well aware that the activities of missionaries are the result of their own miseducation through the medium of a false tradition about black people. But since their problem is also one of emancipation from certain social evils, the black people feel that they are entitled to a change in missionary policy. For these reasons, I suggest that the negative attitude of the black people should consist first of a boycott of missionary literature and exhibitions, and secondly, of a perpetual protest against these forms of missionary policy until a change is brought about. For as long as missionary enterprise maintains its policy of militancy against African culture, the black people will be disrespected. This is the least that the black people are entitled to, respectful treatment, because they are the representatives of the oldest civilization in the world, from which all other cultures have borrowed. I have frequently seen in the parish magazines of some European churches pictures of the following description: an African chief, dressed in a new silk hat, a long shirt, but no trousers, a frock coat and bare feet, probably to provide amusement for the parishioners and to excite their pity. This is what the black people must protest against, and this is how they must live up to their philosophy of redemption and work it out. In conclusion, let us remember that the unfortunate position of the modern church in being associated with the drama of Greek philosophy is excusable, because her missionary function has been due to the erroneous mandates and edicts of secular princes and emperors who ruled the church when it was only a department of state. This bit of ecclesiastical history should be well known to the early branches of the Christian church, and consequently they are the ones whom our enlightened age expects to initiate a change in missionary policy, which would free themselves from the error and superstition of human relations. This lead of the various branches of Catholicism should be followed by Protestantism, so that the entire Church of Christ on earth should be united in this racial reformation, and carry to the mission field a practical gospel of happiness. That is, happiness that must begin while we are here on earth. A gospel that is interested in the total welfare of the people. A gospel which ignores the social and economic rights of natives and emphasizes only happiness in an unknown world is one-sided, misleading, and contrary to Christian tenets and practice. It was early Christianity that established a diaconate for the express purpose of solving the economic problems of its adherents, so that they might begin in their earthly life to experience what happiness really meant. It is evident that the benefits of religion are intended to be coextensive with human needs, and unless the Christian religion changes its missionary policy with respect to the culture of the black people, it would be difficult for them to obtain complete emancipation from the social injuries created by ancient Rome. End of chapter 9. End of Stolen Legacy. Greek philosophy is stolen Egyptian philosophy by George